The Monster Guys podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Monster Guys podcast. Once again, I am DC McGannon. I'm here as always with my partner and co-conspirator in all things creative, C. Michael McGannon. Michael, tonight we've got a fun topic, one that a lot of people really love to hear about, love to talk about, love to watch. We're going to be talking about vampires.
Blood-sucking parasites.
Blood-sucking parasites. However, we're going to be approaching this from a different angle because we're not just going to rehash the common discussion about vampires. What we're actually going to be doing is starting a conversation tonight, and we're going to continue that conversation in a series of podcasts. However, we're not going to do these consecutively. We're gonna bring up some fresh content from time to time on vampires. In the future, we'll have maybe kind of like a boxed set of podcasts on the topic of vampires.
That sounds pretty awesome, but you're saying we're not going to do like 10 in a row.
No. We're going to do this one. We'll revisit the topic later on, and later on down the road, even further, we will combine those episodes for anybody who wants to just listen to a stream of conversations about vampires. But we don't want to get stuck. We want to stay fresh with it and bring some really interesting and unique perspectives to the topic of vampires. We'll still be able to talk about them because I love them. You love them. I know most people love vampires.
Yeah, I mean, they've stuck around in the media for how many years now?
Oh gosh, they've been such a great and powerful influence on cultures for hundreds and hundreds of years.
But I think that's good not to do that many in a row, because that would kind of suck.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, all you wonderful listeners out there, you can subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on iTunes. We ask you to please press that subscribe button. If you like us, like what you hear, and think we're worthy of it, give us a rating and a review. You can also find us on Stitcher and most other places that you can download podcasts. Had somebody ask me this week, can I listen to this podcast somewhere other than iTunes? Yes, you can. And if you can't find it on your app, let us know and see what we can do about getting that to that location. But I think you can find us in most places, and here pretty soon we're also venturing back into video, which I'm pretty excited about.
Heck yeah. It's been a while since we've done anything with that medium.
A lot of good things coming down the pike for us here tonight. We're going to be talking about vampires, and I think what we've discussed for tonight is, as a starting point, is the modern vampire. We're going to start with Bram Stoker's Dracula.
I mean, where else, if we're talking about the modern icon that the word vampire has become, where else do you start but that whole count?
Yeah, it's hard to find a better starting point than Bram Stoker and his literature and all the things that have been birthed from that story. So,
well, I think it's important to point out that it's probably the most influential vampire character, but it's not the first, and it's not even the only one from that region that was written.
Right, but again, he's so incredibly popular and recognizable. It's just a great piece of literature, and the influences that he drew upon for his vampire is just, it's very wide, and it's very fun to get into that. And of course, there's a great debate surrounding that, which is one of the things we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, because I don't think a lot of people know about, there's the Hollywood idea of Dracula, that his stories his inspiration came from, Eastern Europe, Romania, Transylvania, Russia, the Slavic regions. You have a lot of revenants, a lot of creatures that go bump in the night and rise from the grave and go drink the life essence or the blood from people that are sleeping or entire towns and villages. And that's kind of where a lot of people believe the idea of the vampire comes from. And that's partially true, but as you and I know, that's not the whole picture at all.
Right. So let's go back a little bit before we get into those influences, and let's just kind of identify some characteristics, what we're talking about the modern vampire to have. And really, I think some of the common ideas is that people understand that vampires in our modern era can begin as very monstrous, ugly, misshapen, diseased creatures.
Bringers of plague, associated with rats and pigs and flies and gross things of the earth.
So you have that side, of the character, but you also have a very beautiful, elegant, intelligent, well-educated, political creature as well. And that can all be rolled into one depending on the story or depending on the circumstance or the love interest or whatever else is presenting itself at the time. There's also the characteristic that is obviously very common, that these are blood drinkers. These are thirsty for blood creatures.
And sometimes that goes even further into flesh eaters as well.
Flesh eaters, very manipulative.
Mind
control, shape-shifting, very powerful, deceptive creatures.
Yes. I think that's kind of drawn together the classic literature view. I think all of that wrapped into one kind of starts to peek at our modern idea of what a vampire is or should be.
Yeah, and I think one other characteristic of note is that the modern vampire is usually known to own or control a slave of some sort for the purpose of protection or doing its dirty work or just running its errands.
Right, and that slave is usually kind of driven insane and starts out as an upstanding member of society or something and becomes kind of dragged down to these depths of what they're willing to do for their masters.
Okay, so it's kind of a picture that we painted of the modern vampire. We see that played out in modern media through movies and such, in films such as Dracula, obviously Bram Stoker's Dracula. The Lost Boys is another modern and fun telling of that character.
I would say one of your favorite movies, but let's be honest, who doesn't love that movie?
Which one?
Lost Boys.
Oh, heck yes. I thought you were getting ready to say something else. But no. Yeah, definitely. Lost Boys is probably, it's hard to say between Bram Stoker's Dracula and The Lost Boys, for me, which one takes number one. I guess it depends on how I feel the morning I wake up.
And then you have Fright Night. Don't forget that one.
Fright Night. Absolutely love that one. Interview with the Vampire. You brought up the film Let the Right One In.
Mm-hmm. Or its American counterpart, Let Me In.
Let Me In. Because of the whole mind control and slave issue going on there.
Yeah, and I feel like it, even though it plays a twist on that whole vampire realm, or that image where it's a little girl instead of this, domineering aristocratic vampire, she still has that control over those around her and that manipulation aspect.
Right. And I think also to note that, of course, we bring up that one where it's the girl, but most of these characters seem to be the male figure.
They do. And that may be because of the origins that supposedly or allegedly people believe Bram Stoker drew from.
Okay, so let's go there. Bram Stoker writes this beautiful piece of Gothic literature that is just as relevant and gorgeous today as it was then, and as terrifying. What were his inspirations? And again, you mentioned early in the podcast that a lot of people believe that the large portion of his influences come from Eastern Europe. So let's start there. If he's got the inspirations from Eastern Europe, what are we talking about there?
Well, there are a lot of words back then that talked about these witches that would suck the life forth. It would suck the life forth from the victim. No, sorry. It would suck the lice. Golly. The life
forth from the lice of the victims. Let's start over there.
I don't know where I was going with that. Anyways, there were these witches, and another vampire from that region was like a glowing ball of energy that would hover over victims and suck the life force out of people. But then you also have your creatures like one of my favorites, the Nalapsi. The Nalapsi is a revenant, a creature that would come back to life in the grave, travel around with this greasy hair and pale face.
Terrifying creature.
Yeah, he was not known just for drinking.
Vicious.
He wouldn't just drink blood from people. He would ravage an entire town in one night just for the fun of it.
Horrifying.
Yeah, so...
Did I mention terrifying?
I don't think you used terrifying.
Okay,
but
well, it's terrifying.
Covered all the other bases, I think. But yeah, you have this whole range of creatures that, just suck energy from people to the ones that actually brutally murder and drink blood from them. And there are quite a few to choose from in, Russian lore and Transylvanian lore and Serbian lore, all over the place.
And a lot of people believe that these are the primary influences for Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yes, and of course you have Vlad Tepes III himself, son of Vlad Dracula, who was known later on for torturing his victims and torturing his own people and committing some pretty horrible atrocities.
So we have quite a bit of influences both in fiction and in historical record that are believed to be the influences that Bram Stoker drew upon for his modern telling of the story of Dracula.
Right. But I think we've mentioned in podcasts before where we're going next. That's not the whole picture.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think that may even play less of an influence than what we're about to talk about. And what we need to do is kind of cross over some geography and move over to Western Europe, because we have a lot of influences in Western Europe and Western mythology that I believe he drew upon heavily for this story.
Well, more specifically, straight from the Emerald Isle itself.
Yeah, from Ireland. So, talk about the Leanne and She is one of those influences from Irish mythology.
Well, it's important to remember that Bram Stoker himself was an Irishman, and so a lot of the legends that he used to combine with the other stories that he had heard of were, again, the Leanne and She, the Bavan She, and a lot of other Irish fairies that do drink blood. But the Leanne and She specifically is a muse, and that's not the first thing you think of when you think of a vampire, but she was a spirit who would visit young men, specifically poets and artists, and she would inspire them, but she would also take some of their life force away from them in the process. So what you have is a bunch of poets and brilliant young artists who basically go out in a flash. They have these brilliant pieces of work and then they're dead.
Well, Michael, I have a muse tonight with me. It's a very elegant muse. It's contained within this glass.
I'm looking at it.
You're looking at it, and it's a honey wine, and it's actually got a drop of whiskey in it with this whiskey rock that you got me as a Halloween gift. But this is my muse tonight, so cheers to the muse. I hope you all enjoy this sip.
You have your muse, and I am amused.
So there's my muse for the night, and I might just write a story about Dracula after I finish this muse.
So in Ireland, they also had the green fairy, which was absinthe. Is that your golden fairy?
It may be my golden fairy for the evening.
All right. So we talked
the
about
Leanne and She. You mentioned her.
We also have the Bavanshi.
Mm-hmm.
You might notice that these two sound kind of like the Banshee. It's kind of a cousin of these other two fairy women. The Bavanshi was known as a pale, beautiful woman who would kind of roam the wilderness at night and prey upon travelers, seduce them, and drink their blood. Kind of a couple common tropes. The don't go out alone at night because you'll be set upon by monsters, and then, the beautiful seductress that is going to prey upon you and drain you out to a dry husk.
In our conversations about monsters, we seem to come across that quite regularly.
Yeah,
don't go out on your own at night. Don't wander the lonely path, and
especially if you're in Japan.
Stay off the mountain pass, and don't look the beautiful woman in the eye, type of thing. We seem to cross that path quite a bit.
What we're saying, guys, is that you just stay home.
Yeah, stay home.
Watch Netflix or something.
Drink whiskey. I don't even know about watching it. Just pour yourself a drink, have a nice meal.
Read a book.
Read Bram Stoker's Dracula again.
Look out the window, unless you're me, and then cover up all the windows.
So anyway, we've got the Leanne and She, the Bavanshi. You mentioned that they're kind of cousins to the Banshee. These are all Irish legends, still play a very real part in the culture today even. But
yeah, and it's important to note that these are beautiful creatures, and I think that's where we get the whole idea of vampires being beautiful creatures, inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. They're beautiful, seductive, intelligent. These are not just dumb beasts that are roaming around looking for prey and everything. These are deceptive, manipulative creatures, but can also be very pleasant and enjoyable in their presence. But I think that's part of the lure and part of the deception.
Bite into you, but yeah.
Yeah, we've got them. We also have the story of the Dare-Do from Ireland. Yep. And tell us that story, because that's one of my favorite. I love to hear that story.
A young girl falls in love with a farmer, but her father marries her off to a chieftain for, financial gain.
Dumbass.
And so, unfortunately...
You're going to get what's coming to you for that one, buddy.
This chieftain was very abusive. He locked her into a tower, physically abused her, and then starved her to death.
Jerk.
Well, I mean, they both get what's coming to them. But basically this...
You get what's coming to you, buddy.
This girl, who is the beauty of the entire town, is sadly wasted away in the top of a tower. She's buried, and she rises again. And
Here it comes.
She visits her father first, and literally sucks the air out of him. I think sucks the air out of his lungs or something. And
his life force.
Yes. And then she goes to the chieftain, the abusive chieftain, and she's not so kind to him. She actually just ravages him from head to toe and eats him, basically.
I told you, get what's coming to you, buddy. Jerk.
And then she goes...
Moral of the story, guys, stay home, pour yourself a drink, eat a meal, watch a movie, don't be a jerk.
And here's where the story gets interesting. It is now said that she rises once a year from her grave to drink blood. But if you place a stone over her grave, or pile a bunch of stones over her grave, it keeps her down for that year.
If you read Bram Stoker's Dracula, watch the film, you're going to see a lot of influence from those stories, from those legends.
Your beautiful bloodsuckers that often are very passionate and very enticing.
And the argument is pretty substantial that a lot of his influence came from Western Europe. I mean, a couple of points to make is that he never, to our knowledge or to history's recording, actually visited Romania or any of the Eastern European locations. Maybe had conversations with people or just knew from being educated that those things existed and heard the stories. But he actually, like you said, he was an Irishman, so he was very close to those mythologies.
Yeah, and a lot of those stories were circulating in his day and age. The novel Carmilla had been written not too long before that, and I think that played a little bit into his character of Dracula. There's also a story of his friend, I believe his name was Henry, an actor who was known for wearing a cape on stage and yelling at people in the theater. A very interesting, eccentric fellow, I guess.
Both from the standpoint of the stories themselves and from his...
Just his life, really.
Just his life and his proximity to those stories. I see a heavier influence from the Western European legends and mythologies in his creation of Dracula. But, there's a lot of really smart people debating this for a very long time.
Yeah, there are hardcore people on both sides of the argument. One lady went so far as to say that there were no stories of vampires in the Romanian region until about 10 or 20 years ago, and I don't think that I agree with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, that is pretty hardcore, but people will go to a lot of lengths to prove their point.
Right. It just goes to show that there are two very different sides of the coin.
Moving on, we have another story of influence that is very interesting because it's kind of steeped in legend, but possibly, we believe, could be drawn from an actual historical figure. Not completely sure because the record is a little muddy, but there seems to be a person out of which a legend grew and the legend just kind of took over.
You're talking about Abertak. Abertak was a 5th century chieftain, as the legend goes, and like you were saying earlier, there is one very old source that states this as history, but given some of the events later on in the story, it's likely more that is just legend.
And he was a jerk, too.
Yeah, he was a jerk.
There's a lot of these chieftains that were jerks back then.
He was a cruel warlord, basically.
And he was a dwarf.
Said to be a dwarf.
This is what I talked about in the beginning of the episode, and you didn't want me to spoil it.
Well, yeah, it's an important part.
So we have this cruel dwarf warlord, Abertak,
who's said to be a sorcerer, a magician, and a blood drinker.
Okay, pretty potent mix there.
Mm-hmm. This dude demanded
you call a lot of these monsters dudes. I wonder how they would take to that if you called that to them to their face.
They probably would try to suck my blood or something, but I'm okay.
I would stand up for you.
I think we have enough wards around the house.
I would, yeah, but I would still... I'd throw some ninja pirate stuff at them.
That's good, because I'd probably be hiding.
I'd put on my best ninja costume and swashbuckling shoes along with it, and we'd have our day.
I guess I just need to throw a bear pelt on top of you at that point.
Exactly. I'd go all kinds of crazy. Dracula come in our house. Who invited him?
Well, that's right. We'd have to invite him first. Does that go for the older Irish fairies? I don't know. I don't think it does.
I don't think it does. Regardless, even if he was staying at the doorway, I would poke at his eyeballs with my pirate ninja sword from inside the house.
Well, there's an old story. All you have to do is throw a colander out on your front porch and it'll distract the vampire.
True, very true. Okay, so Abertak, this warlord chieftain that really treated his people badly.
Yeah, he terrorized his people. He drank the blood of it. He demanded blood of his people, I should say.
Yeah, drank from their wrists.
Yes. Well, obviously, they got tired of him, you can't be a ruler and get away with that for very long. I mean, I guess you can, but he didn't. The people in his region actually hired out another warlord to come and take over them.
Another jerk.
And kill Abertak. So this warlord comes in and, he kills Abertak, and because Abertak is a chieftain, because of his position, they do him one last honor and bury him in his grave standing upright.
And that's an important part.
That is, because Abertak actually comes back from the grave and gets out of his grave.
Yep.
And so
Time number one.
He
comes out of the grave, standing up. Very convenient for him just to step out.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's just like, reach up, pull yourself out. You don't have to dig through all the earth, I guess. But, he comes back and he starts demanding blood again, and he starts terrorizing the people of his country.
Excuse me while I have a conversation with my muse.
The Golden Fairy.
That's quite yummy. Okay, I'm inspired again.
So night number 1 happens, and the warlord comes and kills Abertak again. Once again, they buried the guy. Well, can you guess what happens next?
He steps out of the grave.
He does. And
Time number 2.
They kill him again and bury him again. I think at this point you kind of learned that something is up. Well, the warlord did. Abertak rose from the grave again, and the warlord got tired of it.
Wait a second. Time number 3.
The warlord got tired of it, and he went to consult with a druid on how to keep this little dude down.
Yeah, okay, here you go, Michael. He goes and consults with a druid, but some stories say that he went and consulted with a Christian.
Yes.
I don't know if it was a priest or just
a Christian of the
your
time.
everyday beach-walking Christian. I don't know.
In Ireland.
Cliff-walking Christian.
And this is where we kind of get the idea that this is more of a legend than history, but,
I think the legend part starts back in the stepping out of the grave 1, 2, and 3 times.
Hey, that happens sometimes.
I guess.
But anyways, according to the advice of this guy he's consulting, the chieftain makes...
I wonder how much the consultants got paid back then for this kind of thing. I kind of want to go into a consultant business myself.
Probably some sheep.
How to keep down the warlord vampires.
Maybe a cow.
I don't...
Lucky horseshoe.
Yeah, no, I need something different payment today.
5 lucky horseshoes?
Okay, we're getting somewhere now.
Okay. I mean, what would you do with a 5th horseshoe? You've already got 4.
I don't know. Well, I don't know.
So the consultant of the time, the Christian druid consultant dude, tells him to make...
That's a pretty messed up dude right there.
A sword out of wood from a yew tree.
So he tells the warlord to fashion a sword out of a yew.
Kind of sounds
tree.
like a wooden stake, right?
A wooden stake.
But the chieftain slays Abertak one last time with the yew wood sword. Then, instead of burying him upright, they actually bury him upside down.
I think they should have done that the first time.
Probably would have been worked. Easier to just throw him in there too. But they bury him again, upside down this time, and they bury him with thorns, or I shouldn't say bury him with thorns. They place thorns all over his grave.
And large stones.
They put a large stone over the top of it. Abertak is now kept down, literally. The interesting thing about this for me is that even though this is a 5th century legend, you can actually go to his grave to this day, or what they believe his grave is.
There's a location in Ireland that you can visit. It looks to me like a slab of rocks, and out of that a tree.
A hawthorn tree.
And which is actually part of the legend that out of the thorns that were surrounding his grave grew this tree.
Nowadays it's called the Giant's Grave. It's considered to be bad land. People don't hold on to the property for very long. Apparently it's traded out often enough. It's interesting to me, I guess in 1997 some guys tried to do some work on the land and tried to cut down that tree and lift those rocks. And their machinery malfunctioned, and one of them got hurt and didn't die, but he cut his hand and spilled blood on that grave. So the legend kind of continues to this day. So you have all of these things that mix together, things that Bram Stoker either heard from secondhand traveler's reports or should have known at that time, just being an Irishman in the time that he was.
Yeah, so we have the Eastern European legends, the Eastern European vampires. We have the Irish legends and vampires and creatures that he drew upon. Okay, so we have these 2 sets of influences, and there are arguments among scholars and among experts that yes, he did, or yes, he didn't take from these influences. And then we have the story of Abertach, which is a clear influence from Ireland. But, as writers, one thing you and I know is that you don't have to be in a place to learn about it or to know about it or draw influence from it. Some of the books that we write, we have locations all over the world that we draw influence and actually set the story in those locations. I'm of the belief that Bram Stoker probably has a pretty good mix of all of these legends.
Most definitely. I was just going to say, even with the name Dracula, there's a story in Ireland, or in Scotland, I can't remember, of a castle called in Irish, or in Gaelic, Dracula. But and some people say that this is the inspiration for the name, but again, the nickname for Dracula in Romania, that's just, to me, it's too much of a clear inspiration from Eastern Europe. I don't think you just draw from one source.
Yeah, and I think what we have here ultimately is a brilliant story writer, brilliant man who has spun a great tale and has drawn from several influences, and we have, as a result, one of the, if not the greatest Gothic novel to be written, at least in our modern times.
Look what it's done for monsters for us to this day. It's probably the most popular monster in our media nowadays.
It is the reference point for just about anything when you get into legends and folklore and monsters in our modern conversation. So a lot of influences from both sides of Europe, and that's where we begin our conversations about vampires, is the modern Dracula, that monstrous, ugly, yet elegant, beautiful, blood-drinking, life-force-taking creature that we see in so many different cultures that culminates in this story of Dracula. And I think probably that's where we're going to leave it for the moment, because we want to continue a conversation about vampires in the future. Definitely. And bring some different angles and some different insights to this conversation.
I don't know about you, but I can't wait for us to get into the vampires that are like flying heads.
Yes, very exciting. Very exciting material. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen, some of the influences and the arguments around Bram Stoker's Dracula and some of those legends, and even further the legend or the history of the chieftain Abertach. You can find out more about us and what we're doing at themonsterguys.com. Subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends about it. Let's just continue to build our little community and have a lot of fun talking about monsters and folklore and legends and mythology. For now, we'll say good night, and I'm going to go have another conversation with my muse.
All right. Good night, everyone.